Okay, we are going to have a real treat today for those of you who have not heard from our new president, Dr. Gregory Thornbury. Just a little bit of quick background on him. He was in 2006 Dean of the School of Theology at Union University. Then in 2010, he became Vice President of Spiritual Life at Union. And then in August 1st of 2013, the Lord brought him here to King's. We are really proud that 3 of our alumni were involved on the search committee, and I can tell you that it was just a God thing that Dr. Thornbury is with us. He loves the alumni, he loves the history, and he loves the school with all his heart. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gregory Thornbury to the podium.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Well, good afternoon. It is a special privilege and treat to have all of you here today. And let me just underscore, it is truly an honor for us to have you join us on campus. It is no small thing to dedicate your weekend to a sortie into New York City. And it has already been a magnificent homecoming weekend thanks to the efforts of Rick Milham and Katie Corbin on our staff. We're honored by your presence, and everything that Rick just certified as being the case is definitely true. I love the King's College, and it's not just because I have a professional obligation to do so. It is because God is doing something amazing in our presence, and I wanted to begin today by saying that as we look at the banners that are hung throughout our campus of celebrating 75 years of God's faithfulness to the King's College, here is something that I know. And I was in the car, in a cab a day before yesterday with Steve French, and I was telling him this, and Steve, we kind of had a moment there, right? We had a moment talking about this, but here's what I know. The story of the King's College is very often a story of the slings and arrows of outrageous theological fortune. We'll just leave it at that right now. But here's what I know to be the case. It is a miracle that the King's College still exists and that it is still dedicated to the mission to which it has always been called. And the fact that the college is here and that we are in the kind of advantageous position that we find ourselves in this season in the college's history, the only thing that I can conclude from that is that God is with us. If God were not with us, this college would not be here because there were too many turns in the road, points in the past in which this thing could have evaporated into thin air, but it didn't. And I think that is a sign of God's favor to us, which we need to be celebrating, particularly at times and seasons like homecoming. So it is a great privilege to be here with you. And I want to say that every morning when I wake up, it is not hard for me to get motivated to come to work, because the project with which we are engaged here at the King's College is something that is something that college presidents dream of doing. And as I think back biblically on the task to which we are called, there are many, many great texts in the Bible with respect to God's people and new seasons of opportunity and advance. But there is no greater one than the opening picture from the book of Deuteronomy, in which you have Moses now getting ready to go on and be with the Lord. He was not going to be able to cross over, as you remember, into the promised land with the people. He's standing there on the plains of Moab, and he's going to give one last great sermon, which I promise you my talk today will not be Mosaic in nature, because I was told by my father the very first time I ever preached when I was 14 years old, he gave me two pieces of advice. And I thought it would be about making sure you stay true to the Bible or keeping Christ at the center. He told me all those things later on. But he told me two things to remember about speaking in public. Number one, the brain can only contain what the bottom can endure. And number two, if you can't strike oil in a half an hour or less, quit boring people. So I promise to keep it pithy and poignant and hopefully trenchant here. But as Moses was standing before them, he was going to give the law one more time. And he said, we have stayed at this mountain long enough. We've stayed at Mount Horeb long enough. It is now time to cross over and take the land of promise. I feel like that's where we are right now as a community of the King's College. But later on, as he actually gets ready to speak to them, and he recites what is now known as the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one God, and you shall love the Lord with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. And Jesus added this later on, and with all of your mind in Matthew 18. Now, we have to keep reminding college students in the aftermath of midterms and as we're anticipating finals here that worshiping God with your mind is an act of worship. But Moses could have talked about a lot of things on the threshold of going over to take the land of promise. He could have gone into detail about the land flowing with milk and honey. He could have talked about the prosperity which was about to ensue for the people. He could have talked about liberty, freedom from captivity and slavery, reminding them of the sojourn out of Egypt. But what was the very first thing that he talked about after he certified, here's who we worship? He talked about education. He said, you are to teach your children to remember the mighty acts of the Lord and his faithfulness to you and to the generations that will follow, generation after generation after generation. And that is the special privilege that we have being legatees of a great institution with a 75-year history like the King's College. It's our job to make sure that that chain does not get broken, that from here on out it is an unbroken succession of reciting the faithfulness to the Lord and bearing witness to this great tradition of which we take part. So at the beginning of every semester, I stood before our faculty and our student leaders at the very beginning of this semester, and I went Vince Lombardi on them. I held up the football. You know, Vince Lombardi said at the beginning of every practice at the beginning of the year with the Green Bay Packers, this is a football, okay? We have to keep reminding ourselves what is the main thing. Well, what's the main thing for a college? The main thing is the mission statement of the college. And here is the mission statement of the King's College. And I think it's a very important preposition with which our mission statement begins. Through its commitment to the truths of Christianity and a biblical worldview, the King's College seeks to transform society by preparing students for careers in which they will help to shape and eventually to lead strategic public and private institutions, and by supporting faculty members as they directly engage through writing and speaking publicly on critical issues. And so, time and again, as I have had opportunity over these last 90 days, 90 plus days now, as I have been in office as the president of the King's College, I have been encountering alumni of this institution, both from the Briarcliff Manor days and also our recent alumni who are delivering on this promise. You are delivering on this promise every single day of your life. And by extension of your doing that and your faithfulness, you're modeling for our current student body what it means to go out into the world and to lead strategic public and private institutions. And this heritage that we have is magnificent, and what you're doing is so strategically important. I was just standing over here talking earlier on. I keep learning things about this history that are inspiring to me. I did not know until about 45 minutes ago talking to some Briarcliff Manor alumni that Walter Martin taught at the King's College. I did not know that. I mean, I grew up with the Kingdom of the Cults book. I mean, you kind of like, when you were a young evangelical coming up, how are you going to stay true to the faith? You were given, kind of a Bible, your 4 Spiritual Laws booklet, and Walter Martin's Kingdom of the Cults. And so I keep being inspired by that. And then last night, we had a reception for some of our young alums, many of whom are here today, but this room was filled with young alums of the King's College who are living and working here in the city. And what was remarkable to me about that evening, I was here for 3 hours. Katie Corbin said to me at the very end, "Man, you stayed until the very end." I said, "I couldn't help myself," because there were so many amazing stories I was hearing. I was meeting, alums who are editors now at Columbia University Press, or have been working for Viacom and MTV, or are working in a wide range of key positions in the financial services industry. And I was so inspired, and I was talking to Kimberly about this morning. I was still kind of buzzing with this morning. And Kimberly said, I think that there's something about the way King's does it that is different than a lot of other institutions, because you can go to Harvard or Yale and they will have, this is Kimberly's line, not mine. So, by the way, the fabulous Dr. Kimberly Carmichael Thornbury, who's sitting over here to my right. We welcome you. She was saying, a lot of other there's a lot of things to attract you to many elite institutions, but she said, I think it's because we don't have rock climbing walls. And the kind of astonishing array of creature comforts that now attend the kind of campus life that we now see from a lot of America's elite public and private institutions. I think it's because we don't have those kinds of things that we're so competitive, because those people, I think, are, to use Neil Postman's term, she said, amusing themselves to death. And we're in here, putting our punches in it and working hard. So it's an inspiration to be here with you today. That's the most important thing that I would like to say. Everybody has asked me, how's it going? I'm closing in now on the first 100 days of my presidency of the King's College. And the very first thing that always comes out of my mouth is, I cannot imagine it going any better than it has been going. It has gone 1,000 times better than I ever even possibly dreamed. And that really started from the, to use a phrase from my former location in the South, right from the get-go. It was really amazing. It was really good. So the very first thing that I did as president was I went on a retreat with the faculty of the King's College. And let me tell you, I use this analogy elsewhere after my first meetings with him, but every college president and new college president coming in is kind of, goes into that first meeting a little bit nervous. What's the condition of the faculty? Where are they on the map? Are they on board with the mission and vision of the college? And, a lot of college presidents get a Ford or a Chevy in the faculty. I came out of that faculty retreat saying, I've got a Maserati. Or an Aston Martin, whichever Top Gear reference you want there. And it's not only that these people are at the peak of their professions, I'll say more about that in just a second. These people spiritually are committed to seeing not only the best and brightest come to New York City and be prepared for those leadership positions in strategic public and private institutions, but they are people that are deeply committed to them becoming not only great citizens of this nation, but they're committed to them becoming serious Christ followers. And so the most moving moment of that faculty retreat for me was at the very end of the faculty retreat. I was giving a financial report on the condition of the college, where we were in terms of enrollment for this fall. And the retreat was over, and every single faculty member of this college stood up, came up. Kimberly, they asked Kimberly to come up, and they laid hands on us, and they prayed for us for a half an hour. That is the faculty of the King's College. And there is not a single one of them that I do not have 150% confidence in. So that's the way we got started. The student leaders came and joined us right at the beginning. So it was the first time in a long time, I don't know the entire history of the college, but all the student leaders and the entire greater faculty met together. I gave a talk to them from Acts chapter 5 about the need for Christian solidarity. We not only need to be with each other for the cause of God and truth in our time, but we need to be for one another. It was an amazing time. Since we got started at King's, and I'll hurry very quickly past this part of it, but the Lord keeps giving me amazing opportunities to speak nationally and to represent the college's interests. Now, I know there's a lot of text on the screen, so you don't feel obligated to read it, but just one example of this is that I was contacted by a journalist from Forbes magazine who said, I just went online and watched your convocation address. I've kind of known about the King's College in the past, but it seems like, you're talking about some interesting things. Can I interview you for Forbes? And I said, sure. Well, this article came out, the title of it was The Book of Revelation is Hayakian, because I was talking about how the animating ideals that we adhere to here at King's, the PP&E core, the politics, philosophy, and economics core curriculum, and the classic liberal arts. He asked me, what are the liberal arts at King's? I said, well, the liberal arts are what they've always been. They are the disciplines that keep a society free from tyranny. That they are liberating in that sense. So we had a really rollicking conversation on the phone for about an hour and a half, and I knew it was being recorded. And then this thing came out in Forbes, and he contacted me a couple days into it, and he said, "This is like I've never gotten any response to anything that I've written like this one." Now, that's not because I think I said such brilliant things, but I think the eyes of the world are on the King's College. And people want to see us succeed. Now, that's where I'm going to park the bus later. And by the way, I use bus and train analogies now than car analogies because we had to sell both of our cars. The announcement happened on July 11th, and in 3 weeks we had to sell our house. The Thornburys had to sell our house, sell our cars, have an estate sale, sell off 95% of our possessions, and move to New York by the end of July. It's like the rapture happened in Tennessee. We just disappeared overnight. So we don't have a car anymore, so I use bus and train analogies. So we've been very, very excited about the opportunities that the Lord is giving us and the things that the student body themselves are saying. So the National Review picked up this article that was written by one of our transfer students this fall, Patrick Seaworth, in which he narrated he went to Ohio State and then he transferred to King's, and he talked about the difference between being at Ohio State and being at King's. And what he talked about was, I thought, pretty remarkable, because he said, whereas, not to say anything bad about Ohio State, but while I was there, if you were conservative, or if you were patriotic, or you wanted to be explicit about your faith, those were things that were not cool to happen in the classroom. And he said to be in a place in which it's not embarrassing, but it's actually seen as a positive thing to have pride in one's country and to honor God. What an amazing change this has been in my life. That's the kind of thing that's happening. So we're very grateful for the people that have been joining our team. Let me just give a couple of highlights for the faculty, from the faculty of the King's College. One of the folks that have joined us this fall is Professor Paul Glatter. You want people joining your faculty that, listen, I am as much of an academic as anybody else. I was a philosophy professor in my former life, and I love nothing better than a good idea and a rigorous academic debate. But you also want to have people that have been in the real world and, can rock and roll in a competitive environment. Well, here's an example of that kind of person. Paul Glatter came to us after a very prestigious fellowship in Berlin, having come from the Wall Street Journal. He was a journalist for the Wall Street Journal. A graduate preparation, is well known in journalistic circles. Just recently presented a very prominent paper at a conference at Columbia University. So he's come and joined our faculty as a professor of journalism. Since he has come here, we were contacted by the estate of John McCandlish Phillips. Now, that name might not ring a bell to some of you, but for others it will. John McCandlish Phillips was a celebrated and well-known and award-winning New York Times journalist from the previous generation. And the thing that distinguished John McCandlish Phillips is that he was known as the best investigative journalist at the New York Times. And yet, he was openly Christian. I mean, he was letting his freak flag fly for Jesus when he showed up at the New York Times. So he would open up his Bible on his desk and he would say, "Lord, please give me the leads that I need to track this down." And God would give them to him. And so his testimony is well known to everyone in the field. So he was the best in his field and also forthright about his testimony. So the McCandlish Phillips estate said, we would like to start an institute at King's in honor of John McCandlish Phillips, and Professor Glatter will be heading up that effort. Dr. Dan Seidel has also joined our work here at the King's College. Dan Seidel is, by any stretch, maybe the most celebrated art historian in evangelical Christian circles today. His book, God in the Gallery, is a textbook across the country for students studying Christianity in the arts. And so he has now joined our faculty as a presidential scholar and art historian in residence. And the reaction to his appointment has been nothing short of stellar. So the International Arts Movement Conference was here the week that we made the appointment, and I had the privilege of introducing. Dan was the keynote speaker at this national conference. And when I made the announcement about Dan Seidel was coming to the King's College, the whole crowd erupted in applause. So not only are we, in areas like journalism and in government and in business and finance, have the best faculty, but now increasingly in the area of the humanities and the arts, have the best people in the biz representing us. And Dan Seidel is here this weekend. Tyler Vosser told me yesterday, Dan posted that he was going to have a lecture coming up in a couple of weeks, and we sent out kind of an evite for it, and I think it's already like maxed out. We may have to move it to a bigger location because it's so popular. But now this is, you have to get your magnifying glass out for this, because these are just publications in the last couple of weeks that our faculty have had. And so if you look at that mission statement of the King's College, you'll notice they're the things that we all recognize, preparing students for strategic public and private institutions. But there's a very crucial last part of that mission statement, which is we're here to support faculty as they speak directly to and critically engage public square issues. And they're doing that. So you almost cannot turn on Fox News or CNBC or The Blaze without seeing Brian Bremberg, a.k.a. Superman, on the television screen talking about the competitive advantage of free markets and free enterprise, but framed with the kind of Judeo-Christian moral ethic. And so you just go down through this list. I can't talk about them all, but we really truly have rock star professors here. Anthony Bradley is one of the most well-known theologians in the country. Alyssa Wilkinson, who teaches in our Media Culture and the Arts Division, is the chief film critic for Christianity Today. And Joe LeConte, Professor LeConte, you got to come take even just sit in on a class or two with him sometime. He's amazing. But my joke about Joe LeConte is when you call to make an appointment with him in the faculty offices, they tell you, please hold while Dr. LeConte completes another book, because he is so prolific. He's got 2 books coming out next year, one on John Locke and political liberty, and then another one on how the First World War framed the way C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien thought and write and engaged through their great literary projects. And so Joe LeConte and I will be speaking at the Oxbridge Conference in Oxford next summer, and that's it's just such a privilege to be involved with this faculty, and you see many of their other accomplishments here. The spirit of revival is on this campus. So a couple of weeks into the semester, we had a student fall retreat that was announced, and we were told going into it, wow, if we haven't done this in a little bit of time, but if we could get 100 students to go on the student fall retreat, kind of get out of the city, that would be really positive for the student body. Over 80% of the student body showed up at this thing. And they heard amazing talks, encouraging them from the scriptures, from my wife, Dr. Kimberly Thornbury, as well as Drew Johnson, Anthony Bradley, Eric Bennett, and then a whole range of other staff and faculty members doing breakout sessions with them. And all I can say is that, seeing 400 plus King's College students, faculty, and staff members worshiping God together, and the spiritual tone on campus is electric. So last year, our student worship services had at best maybe a dozen or 24 people coming. Consistently, we have 120, 150 showing up and praising God. So the work of the Spirit is fresh upon our campus. How many of you were at the Briarcliff Manor event, the 75th event? Thank you so much for being here. That was a very, very special time. Thank you for being there. I have to say, it was such a privilege to be there with Rick Milham and also with Bob Straighten, who was an associate of Percy Crawford, and also Bob Cooks sung in Percy Crawford's quartet and was an associate with Bob Cook. And one of the things that is so important to me is to start retelling the story of those times at the King's College, because there are amazing annals in our history which we need to be telling this generation of King's College students. Because just even when you think about things like where the campus was in Belmar, New Jersey, when Percy Crawford founded it there, he took over the facility that was started by the research facility from Guglielmo Marconi, who was the pioneer of the radio. And he took over that campus. Now, by the way, I did say at this event, and I kind of said this a little bit with fear and trepidation, that Percy Crawford, I had done my homework, and I found out that Percy Crawford originally wanted the King's College in New York City. Bob Straighten got up after me and said, Dr. Thornbury is 100% right. That is true. That is what Percy Crawford wanted. But there was this progression from Belmar to Delaware to Briarcliff Manor, and that was a very special season in the life of the King's College. And so we wanted to go back to Briarcliff Manor and commemorate those days. And so now what's happening is the beginning of a real archival project on the King's College. So there's not a week that goes by where I don't get something like this from people. This is a souvenir folder on Briarcliff Lodge in Briarcliff Manor, New York. And the aesthetics of the King's College have always been very good. And there's the campus. So these are the kinds of things. My goal is to have an institutional history written at some point and to be interviewing many of you about those days. So that was a very special event. Here's our cake celebrating the Briarcliff Manor campus. We've had many fabulous speakers. One of the great things about being in New York is you're at the epicenter of the greatest intellectual and spiritual leaders in the country. Everybody wants to come to New York, which means that you can put them in front of your students on a regular basis. So we had Jay Richards at the beginning of the semester. Over 100 people came out as his book launched for his new book on the stock market crisis of 2008 and what the origins for that were, both economically and spiritually. David Kinnaman, who is the president and CEO of the Barna Research Group, came and talked about how to engage millennials in discussions about their Christian faith. David Bentley Hart, who is arguably one of the preeminent writing theologians of our time, came in and talked and gave a very, very challenging esoteric philosophical talk from his new book, The Experience of God. And there were many adults that were there in that room. Many people from the community came. And one guy said afterwards, I didn't understand a word he said, but I'm glad he's on our side. However, the people that did understand them in the room were our King's College students. And they engaged with him in follow-up and question and answer afterwards. The final picture here is from Vernon Hill, who was the founder of Commerce Bank here on the Eastern Seaboard. He sold Commerce Bank to TD Bank, and then which is a huge success story, the biggest banking success story of the past 30 years, Commerce Bank. He sold to TD Bank and then moved to London and got the first charter for a bank in London since 1819. And he now has 60 branches there. It's a huge success story there. He came and gave a talk on entrepreneurism and branding to our students. And as he was walking out to the car, he said, this is like being in a time machine. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's like going back to the 1930s and 40s. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, all the kids are kind of clean cut, no glassy look in their eye. They talk in intelligent sentences and paragraphs. All the guys are wearing bow ties, and, they're all present well. And he's like, this is amazing. So that's what we're able to do by having some of these special guests. We're at a very great place with our enrollment this fall, 500 students this fall. As you can see, last year, dip from last year. Last year we tried to grow the enrollment very rapidly, but King's is very competitive and tough. And so not a lot of them were able to return, but I will say this, as Brian Parker and his team have been out doing recruiting, our applications for next year are at an all-time high. And we are very, very optimistic about significant enrollment growth as we approach next year. So, day to day, what is my job? We are finding new donors and friends to ensure a competitive future for the King's College, to think toward the fall 2014 class and what they will bring to this campus that will bring space and meeting needs for us. We have searches out for a new provost, vice president for academic administration, vice president for development. We have an online program that's getting underway and a number of other things. But day to day, our primary job is the care and retention of King's College students and making sure that they are taken care of. So make sure that you're following us on social media, and if that's something that you do, because it's a great way to plug in with what is happening on campus. And our newsletter that comes out that's been recently formatted, and thanks to Chad Abbott and Tyler Vosser for making that look amazing. Now, here's where I would like to park the bus for today. I have been asked on several occasions in the last couple of weeks by a number of reporters to speak to a very interesting phenomenon. And I was in Louisville giving the Norton lectures this week, and someone asked me, it wasn't about my lecture, but it was about this fact. Is there a revival happening in New York City? Because there have been a number of pieces that have come out recently. There was one that came out in Religion News. Here are the people that are contributing to a new spiritual renaissance in New York City. And by God's grace, in kind of the 12 people and institutions shaping that, the King's College was listed as participating in that. So I've given a number of interviews on this, and let me just say this. Historians will be able to ascertain, they'll be able to tell us whether or not this meets the rises to the level of being called a revival. But I will tell you this. The Lord is doing something in New York City, the likes of which have not been seen since 1857 and Jeremiah Lanphier and the aftermath of the stock market crash in 1857. He began a prayer meeting just down here on Fulton Street, just a couple blocks away. By the way, I love being in the financial district because we're in the birthplace of America here. You walk that direction, you can see Alexander Hamilton, our founding father's gravestone. Well, I can't see it right now. They're repairing it. But basically the father of American mercantilism, he's right there. Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, just right around the corner of the Stock Exchange. And the Fulton Street Revival. It's such an amazing, it's like being like in an American Disneyland down here. And so I was talking to this reporter and talking to him about the fact that there is truly a spiritual renaissance happening. God is doing something. And we get to be a part of that. And here's where I would like to end my remarks for today. There is a lot of anger, negativity, and despair out there in people who share our worldview out there in culture. Okay? And all God's people said, amen. There are a lot of people that are down in the dumps, downcast. But I will not be party to a chicken little worldview when Jesus is Lord. And here's why the King's College is important. Here we are in the center of culture. We are in Manhattan, where the most important decisions about the future of the planet are happening on a daily basis. And I think that as the Lord blesses us and as we succeed in being competitive in this environment, we become a symbol of hope to the rest of the nation because it's the Sinatra factor. It's the Sinatra factor. You remember New York, New York, right? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So as God blesses us, as our students go out into these various different fields, whether it be in politics and government or in economics and philosophy or business and finance and media culture and the arts, we become a symbol of hope and inspiration to other people that if they're able to do this in New York City, maybe God is not done with the church being a prophetic witness to our society and culture yet. I like being in that space, and I hope you do too. But I think we can only do it if we continue to be on our knees before God and praying that God's grace, the effort, will succeed. Thank you so much for being here today and for blessing us and endorsing us with your presence today. Thank you very much.